Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rick Ackerman, editor of the newsletter Rick's Picks, his website rickackerman.com. Welcome back to the show, Rick.
Always a pleasure, Jim. I appreciate your inviting me on.
Rick, U.S. initial jobless claims at their lowest level since 1969. Does that show that there's a labor shortage and we'll see wages or wage demands continue to be higher? Or, again, are we getting accurate stats here? Or have people just stopped applying for government aid because they've given up on the possibility of finding a job that they want to do?
Well, I think the 11 people that are still working out there, they're going to be constantly demanding higher wages. But, you know, the Wall Street Journal, the lead headline there, just to show you what their job is, that something about jobless claims come in 190-something thousand under, they fell by something or whatever. But to lead with the story like that, with the obvious implication that the recovery, I use that word in quotes, is picking up steam is so absurd. They talk about consumer spending being indicative of the recovering economy, but, you know, when you have an economy that's 100% based on consumption and borrowing, you wonder where all that goes. So anyway, the Wall Street Journal's out there cheerleading the drop in jobless figures when nobody can make sense of the fact that there's so many unfilled jobs. Nobody wants to work. Half the businesses out there running in second gear.
Well, how can you even make a jobless claim and collect EI if there are lots of jobs to be had? Because you're supposed to prove that you're looking for work to collect your employment insurance. So all the places you applied to weren't looking for people?
Well, that's an inconvenient question. It's true. I suppose they have to show evidence every week that they were looking, but I guess they're just being very picky.
Well, I've heard from employers now where people have come in for job interviews and they've decided, yeah, you're our two best prospects. They call them and remind them, okay, you start 9 o'clock Monday morning, and they never show up. And that keeps happening to them time and time again.
Uh-huh. Well, there must have been something better to watch on television. That's why Netflix keeps going higher and higher and higher. All these people who don't show up for their jobs are home binge watching.
So when we're in a situation like this where we're not sure the government stats are true or not, how can we judge what's really happening with an economy, and how can we participate and try to make money from it?
Well, I've never really seen what's coming as a big money-making opportunity. You know, money-making comes out of leveraging. It comes from greedy thieves getting in on the ground floor with insider stock that they buy for 4 cents a share, eventually cashing out to egregiously greater fools for $150 a share. So we're kind of headed into a deleveraging event, and there's no money to be made there. John Paulson proved that in the 2008 in the real estate collapse, because what it took for him to make billions of dollars from that episode was a brilliant subterfuge, and no one was ever convicted really. But what he had to do to profit from essentially a deleveraging of the whole world of real estate was very elaborate. So I would suggest that anybody wanting to get their house in order for the coming deflation and second Great Depression had better not think of it as a money-making opportunity.
Now, with the markets, so often every week we're saying the S&P's hit a record high or the Dow's hit a record high. The Dow hasn't hit records in recent days, but still very toppy. What's your view of what the stock markets are doing right now, and what's their future going into the new year?
Well, it's sort of nutso. It's especially crazy when you try to relate the market's exuberance with essentially an America that is in an absolute state of collapse. You turn on the news, and the looters are ransacking Union Square in San Francisco. We're not talking about, some convenience store robbery in the Mission District. We're talking about the prime shopping district in town. They're having the huge display windows broken out, and the looters are coming in cars, and they're just driving off. And I think that it's the broken window thing. The rule says that they can take up to, I think it's $997 worth of stuff without being charged with anything but a misdemeanor. But I think the broken window thing has led them into Louis Vuitton and Ralph Lauren and Macy's, Nordstrom's and Burberry's. So they've really gone upscale. And you have to laugh, because San Francisco's solution, they've got this nut job in charge, Mayor, what's her name? It's London. I can't remember her name, but her solution is to restrict parking in some of the high rent shopping districts, so the looters can't park their cars to make quick getaways. So anyway, and we've got the Kenosha murders, which have quickly dropped off the pages of our alleged newspapers. And so the country is really unraveling, and here's the stock market up within a few days rally of all-time highs. So it's really absurd, and there's no question we're in a topping process here, but the process has to take into account that the inexorable flow of money from these institutions, it's just there. It just keeps coming. That's what they do. They take people's money and they throw it at 6 stocks. So the leadership has shrunk, and technically indicators of breadth they're startling. They're really alarming as to how few stocks are carrying the market. You've got more than half the stocks are trading below their 200-day moving average. So the rally at this point is pinpoint focused. It's all going into a few essentially glorified advertising firms like Facebook and Google, and of course into the one retailer, Amazon, that's going to be left when the dust settles. So it's crazy, but we're in a topping process.
In a situation like that, do you take your cash off the table and run for the hills if you want to make a return on your investment when we have effectively zero interest rates? What do you do?
Well, you put your money in things that everybody else hates, which means some of it in gold, some of it in treasuries. That's where you and I have talked about that a lot of times, and I think it's almost axiomatic that when you want to reap the sales, you got to. Well, you want to put your money in things that are very unpopular. So you couldn't do much better than gold and bonds.
Do you think gold miners at some point are going to pick up? It's like their shares are poison or something. Nobody wants to touch them.
Well, you have a lot of these companies, especially the junior exploration companies, that are so hugely undervalued relative to gold that they either possess or control or know the location of. So the big problem, though, is the energy input, and it's really hard to predict how long it's going to take for the impact of more expensive energy to hit. But it's going to hit everybody, particularly the miners. You go out to a mining site and you see the size of the tractors and rock crushers that it takes to extract minute quantities of gold powder from the ground, and you begin to understand that as fuel prices go up, and also the labor input, that these companies are going to struggle. So I think that's definitely going to inhibit the gold stocks from ever realizing their full value.
We'll have more with Rick Ackerman right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rick Ackerman. Rick, we have the Bitcoin phenomena really going nuts in El Salvador, where it's accepted as currency. The president, who's young enough to like to wear his baseball cap backwards. When I was a kid, no one wanted to be a catcher. Now everybody does. He's planning to build what he calls Bitcoin City, power it through the heat generated by a volcano, and apparently geothermal power in El Salvador is used, but not enough for them to stop their diesel imports yet for power. Is that the wave of the future? We're all going to be Bitcoin miners and using volcanoes to bring that hidden wealth to the earth.
Well, I think sometimes we underestimate how smart when politicians operate as criminals, which pretty much all of them are, we tend to think of them as second-rate criminals, otherwise they would not have run for office. They ran for office because it's obviously much easier to steal from the public sector than the private. But I have to say that Nicaragua is showing a lot of innovation. They're right up there with some of the mafia grads of Wharton School and Sloan. And I think it's a great idea because there's a guy going into Bitcoin wholeheartedly with he's got the backing really of an enthusiastic global community of bankers who I would remind you don't really have any skin in the game. For Chase or Citi to say we think Bitcoin's the future, just ask them, well, how much money do you have tied up in Bitcoin? And so everybody's kind of hyping it, and I think it's terrific that at least one politician has shown himself to have the kind of brains that criminals operating in the private sector have.
Do you know what an executive at J.P. Morgan said about communist China and the Communist Chinese Party? Because today J.P. Morgan is issuing an apology about it, and I'm going, since when do you have to apologize about saying something about a very nasty government?
Yeah, I don't know what the particular statement was. Well, I think, didn't Jamie Dimon get in trouble for saying something that was construed as anti-Chinese? I don't even know. You lose track of all these statements that are made and later apologized for.
Yes, boss Jamie Dimon apologizes for a comment he made about the Chinese Communist Party. Obviously, J.P. Morgan does a lot of business in China, and he doesn't want to ruffle feathers.
Right. Yeah, that's it's true. We got to do business with those guys, and nobody knows how much business we're going to do in the future, whether the Chinese even wants to do business with us. I would say they've taken steps to kind of set themselves outside of or alleviate their dependency on the Western banking system. So I don't think that bodes well for Jamie Dimon, but it's the old thing about we'll provide the rope with which the commies hang us.
Well, apparently he made a joke about the Chinese Communist Party during a visit to Hong Kong, which is supposed to be independent of China, but they're not. I think that's a pretty interesting thing. So, and we know, of course, finances stretch around the planet, that there's no such thing anymore, I think, as a local economy. Have we learned our lessons about not having to, have our supplies come from factories in China where they use child and slave labor?
Yeah, and it's one thing to sort of posture around the moral issues there, but I'm reading a couple really good guys. One is Charles Hugh Smith, probably the best blog out there online, a real deep thinker, and James Kunstler, and they're both talking about local in the sense of we're all going to have to be more self-sustaining than we've ever imagined would be necessary just to eat in the not too distant future. So, and the energy input is very important there. Kunstler makes the point that it's not, we can't keep shipping our strawberries from New Zealand, and people can't continue to work on the 66th floor of some New York skyscraper and just go down, take the elevator down for push cart hot dog. So, the cities are going to have to reorganize themselves to be self-sustaining, but primarily, at least first of all, in the way of providing their own food.
Well, I was wondering, all these empty offices, could they not be turned into vertical farms? We've all seen the luscious marijuana plants you can get from indoor growing, which was the habit before it became legal. Why not turn these into places that grow vegetables? They have all the heating and light that you need to do it, and water's available. You just have to reconfigure them.
No, but Kunstler goes at that directly. When the energy inputs merely to do hydroponics in some skyscraper are not. You run into the same problem. It's not only getting all the water you need to grow enough to feed a city, but the light, the power would be an enormous drain, and simply getting fertilizer and things up to the 42nd floor, or, well, even if you do it on the first 5 floors, it's still a lot to grow food that has to be trucked out to the suburbs. It's not like the cities. The city worker populations are a lot of suburbanites. So it's much more efficient to simply grow the food out there in suburbia and exurbia than think. And by the time we reach that point with the skyscrapers being converted to farm acreage, the whole infrastructure of civilization has been compromised to the point where you might as well just forget about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, I'm thinking of Vancouver, which is unlike most North American cities. The downtown is where we have 150,000 people roughly living because of all the high-rise apartments and condos. Hong Kong would be another place like that. But in America, after 5 o'clock, when the business community closes down, the downtown core is basically a ghost town except for all the homeless. And now it's a ghost town in a lot of cities during the day because people haven't gone back to work in their downtown offices. Yeah,
but what would you infer of property values, of commercial real estate values, at such time as you're growing your food supply on what would be considered prime or some of the most expensive real estate in the world right now? I mean, who knows? I hate to think of where we're going to be before that could even come about as a last-ditch emergency. But we don't. We're not doing so well planning even for current maintenance, much less last-ditch emergencies that are going to feed whole urban populations and things like that. So I'm kind of I'm not even a dystopian or I guess I'm getting cynical in my old age. Where was the quote? Quote of the day. I got this from my brother. The true pessimist knows it's already too late to be one.
All my clothes are white, so I can just make a surrender flag out of them immediately. And then carry on. Hopefully they observe the Geneva Convention. Rick, now, whether we believe the government inflation numbers or not, we know in reality they're much higher. How long is this inflation going to stick around? And does it end suddenly and then we're plunged into deflation?
Well, it's not an organic inflation. There's so many weird things that are making it happen. It's slowly eased slightly into the wage push part of it that we saw during the 70s. That's what I would refer to as organic inflation. Wages drove prices, which in turn drove wages, and so on. And so it was a true spiral. But there's no such organic push right now. You have shortages, which are, I hesitate to call them anomalous because they're going to be with us for the next 100 years, but or at least 50 years. But shortages in weird ways are driving up prices, and you've got this crazy labor shortage. But it's not going to outlast the bubble itself, the bubble that's there in real estate prices, in stock prices, and to some extent bond prices. So,
Rick, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Always a pleasure, Jim. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with your audience.
My guest has been Rick Ackerman, editor of the newsletter Rick's Picks. Check out his website, rickackerman.com. If you have any questions for Rick or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.